request my colleague here today, Ms. Neha Kirpal. Neha, of course, is a global mental health ambassador and member of the general body of Sangat, which is an international NGO which works for the mental health research in India. In 2019, Neha co-founded Amaha, one of India's largest mental health organizations, delivering accessible and high-quality treatment, care, and support in 15 plus languages, and with an in-house team of over 150 plus psychologists and psychiatrists. Today, Amaha's digital platform has touched over 5 million people globally. Neha is part of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Community 2015-2020. She received the NDTV Indian of the Year Award 2018, Fortune Magazine's 40 Under 40 2015, and the coveted Business Today's India's Most Powerful Women Award for 3 consecutive years.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and also for this opportunity to have this conversation in such a wide, diverse context, bringing not just mental health into the broader health and public health discourse, but also looking at the relationship that mental health has across various SDGs. And also in my particular case, to look at perhaps bringing in people from the community, people like myself who are here, and in a sense our drive and motivation comes from very deep personal experiences that we have gone through in dealing with mental health challenges in this country. And so I thank the organizers and everyone here to be able to bring in all of those perspectives as we have this conversation today. I think what has brought me to this stage and in this conversation is really many decades of severe mental illness that I have personally seen in my own family. We've had 2 generations of serious mental illness in the case of my mother and younger brother. And back in the 80s, when people didn't know what schizophrenia was, all it meant was that we were a family that was alienated and ostracized, and spent the next 10 years trying to figure out what we were dealing with. At that stage, the status of infrastructure in the country, the way service delivery was organized, the stigma, the lack of awareness, all of that was a challenge. And therefore, what it meant was that it took us 25 years to get any kind of treatment to my mother, and today she has spent many years fully rehabilitated and is doing very well, but it is the coming together of an ecosystem in the community, in treatment, as well as just looking at the medication that is needed, all of those aspects that have created recovery. What that means for the younger generation, right, as children, growing up, and I've lost my younger brother. He died by suicide 2 years ago, and so for me, this is really a lost and found cause, and it's something that many of us who are here and mission driven, I personally and many of us have been looking at the way the mental health landscape has been over the last 3 decades, the way services are organized, the way policy is structured, the lack of access, the lack of equity. I used to work in the arts, and so in 2018, I sold and moved on from the India Art Fair, which was my first baby, for those of you who know the Art Fair, and decided to dedicate the rest of whatever number of years there are to mental health. And the idea really was, can we look at cross-sectoral collaboration? Can we look at building an ecosystem? Can we look at building alliances of public and private sector, bringing in the voice of the people with lived experience, which is why I brought it into my introduction, so that what we build as a solution is something that actually works and resonates for the people and with the people, right? And so with that intention, we set out on a few journeys in parallel, but also to share what the intersections are. And so we've talked about sort of the relationship of mental health with various SDGs across gender and education, and the impact it has, but also the experiences across these shape our mental health. We can look at the global context and see, large, staggering numbers, and with such limited funding and resource allocation, and also limited expertise, and there's of course a limited pool of providers and specialists in this space, we know that. And so if we say that every 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health condition in the course of their lifetime, and it takes people on an average 4 to 6 years to get to their first appointment, In the Indian context, pre-COVID, there was a report in 2017 by NIMHANS that said 200 million people have diagnosed mental health conditions, and the treatment gap is about 95%. In India. And so India has a third of the global burden for depression, for suicides, for addiction, and nearly 37% of the global suicides are taking place in India. It is the second largest cause of death in the 15 to 29 age segment. Now, if we just think about that, we think about everything that we're doing for young people. We're educating our young people, we're creating employment, we're looking at infrastructure, we're looking at so many aspects that bring in equity. And here we are looking at suicide as the second largest cause of death for that age population. Approximately 50 million children grappling with mental health issues, facing an average wait time of 10 years, at the end of which 1% receive the treatment, perhaps, if that. And so these are sort of what the numbers tell us. And so if we think about sort of what systemic interventions might be needed, and there are many more, but just to pull out a few, we look at policy and legislation that needs to align, and India has had in 2017 the Mental Health Care Act, which has brought about many changes and possibilities. The implementation of the Act, the interpretation of the Act, and how it goes across states is something that is still work in progress from 2017 going on to 2024. But we do have the right framework in place to begin building capacities. That takes us to capacity building, and I'll talk more about that in the context of the India Mental Health Alliance work. But of course, the need for more providers, better qualified providers, providers who are working together collaboratively in a multidisciplinary way. There is the need for people within communities to be empowered, first aid responders, community health workers, police, various teachers, various frontline people who can solve for early intervention needs. So all of that is a big capacity sort of block that needs to be looked at. And then, of course, service delivery and infrastructure. And there was a little bit about AMAHA, which is our service delivery organization, that tells you that, through the use of technology and using remote access, we are today reaching 600 cities in 18 languages with our clinical team of psychiatrists and therapists. And so in most of these cities, there are no psychiatrists and therapists. And therefore, their only access point is somehow they have found either our app, or they have, which is in English only at the moment, or they have found some way of reaching our services, and then that is their first connection with that sort of therapeutic journey. So at AMAHA, we realized that we need to provide information and content. We need to provide self-assessment and diagnostic support to help people understand perhaps where they're at on their journey, and then to help them access the bouquet of tools and services that are needed. Because we know one size doesn't fit all. We know that it takes different kinds of solutions for different people, and sometimes it's a combination. And so you look at the entire biopsychosocial loop and see how it comes together in solving for people. And so we have, at AMAHA, we have a community section where we have people, it's a free section where people can come in, communities for addiction, for depression, focus group communities for LGBTQ and others, so as to make sure that you can share experience, strength, and hope with those who have also been on a similar journey. And so that's a little bit about service delivery. We realized in that course that actually there is a gap in transition years. And so the idea of looking at a lifespan approach is that when you have children and adolescents and their mental health needs, and then their growing years, the years that they're most sort of vulnerable, what is the support? And at that stage, we realized that the services are not bridged. And so then 2 years ago, we acquired and partnered Children First, which is a Delhi-based organization run by 3 fabulous psychologists and psychiatrists who've been going for 15 years. And they work with, they're a 70-member team. They work with little children on neurodiverse children, kids with autism, other developmental challenges, ADHD, and then we work across the transition years. And so by bringing these 2 organizations together, we are trying to build a systemic support system for the entire family, where we can look at children and adults together as one integrated service. And then, of course, we've talked a little bit about technology and the need for reach and access, but also to help essentially operationalize and streamline the supply side, right? And so to look at the doctors and the psychiatrists and the therapists who are there to see how can we make their time more efficient? How can we triage in a way that we are doing some task shifting? And there are folks who are taking early intervention is different, and sort of more severe chronic cases are handled differently. And so if you look at what the gaps are, in a nutshell, we've touched on them. We've talked about equity in access. We've talked about the need for training. There is the need for a shift in paradigm about how we're constructing the narrative. What are the services we are building? And is the voice of the lived experience and the community a part of that or not? We've talked a little bit about the inter- and intra-sectoral collaboration needs, because mental health cannot be looked at in a silo. The reason we have challenges is because it is sort of, the person is not the problem is the problem, and the problem and the person is in the context of a society and a community. And therefore, rather than trying to fix an individual, can we take a broader approach of looking at what can we change in our education system? How can we look at teaching in a certain way? What are the early detection tools that we can share with parents? Those are just some examples of why we need to look at this broader biopsychosocial approach. And then, of course, the community and lived experience that we've talked a little bit about now. Coming now to the need for the India Mental Health Alliance, and I think just the last couple of minutes on that. The idea for us is to really focus on looking at reimagining and transforming the urban mental health landscape in a way that is culturally resonant, and not sort of to copy-paste models that work in Chennai and Delhi and in Bangalore, in Manipur, but really to look at co-creating and developing models that actually work in different contexts for different populations and communities, depending on what their needs are. And so the prioritization is really capacity building, but we recognize that we cannot do it just for professionals. We have to build it within communities, because there are just not enough people, and we're already too late, and there just isn't enough training available even to provide, to solve for the need gap that we've talked about earlier. And so that's sort of the structure of the India Mental Health Alliance. And the idea really is to be able to focus on bringing together that thought leadership and the alliance building, and community strengthening and so on. I'll just skim through this. I think the importance is really to be intentional about what we're doing, because we could build what we think is the ecosystem of care that is needed in this country today for the problems we know today and for the way we understand them today. But at the same time, to be intentional about constantly adapting and evolving that in response and together with the community, I think is really important. The localization of it, the community focus, the grounded approach, all of that is something that we believe is sort of really the ethos of the India Mental Health Alliance. And I think I'll sort of stop there, but this gives you a sense of how and why we are thinking about building the India Mental Health Alliance. What is the need for something like this, so that organizations like Amaha or like Sangat or like Children First or so many wonderful organizations across the country who are doing amazing work, can we bring it together and create a nexus of shared resources, shared value, and then together we are able to create perhaps a knowledge center. I mean, now this is the dream. Can we create a knowledge center that can actually offer certain hybrid models of training that we're able to bring in through these partnerships and offer it as a central repository, including directory listings of who to access and how to find services, etc. So I could go on about how we're imagining and dreaming about the India Mental Health Alliance, but really I'll stop here and invite all of you as a continuation of this conversation to really engage with us and help us shape what this could be, and work with the India Mental Health Alliance by bringing your ideas, your expertise, and your learning, and try and see how we can collaborate, not just for mental health, but how we can be more mentally healthy as a community, as a society, as a people, so that overall we can better the lives of children and adults and across the lifespan. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Alina is the co-founder of an organization called Mitti Cafe. Mitti Cafe was started when she was just 23 years old, and I don't think she looks any older than 23 today as well. Mitti Cafe works towards economic independence and dignity for persons with different abilities. The organization's outreach initiative helps create awareness about inclusion and disability rights. Alina is a 4-time TED speaker, has been featured in Forbes list of 30 under 30 Asia. She's a Commonwealth Youth Awardee and has received the Niti Aayog's Women Transforming India Award, Helen Keller Award, United Nations Intercultural Innovation Award, Times of India's She Unlimited Award, Rotary Exemplar Award, TICON Young Female Entrepreneur of the Year Award, amongst others. Thank you very much, Alina, for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm here on the stage the second time over, and every time, as I was mentioning to someone, it's a pleasure. There's so much of learning, there's so much of unlearning. Let me take you all back a couple of years. 22-year-old, college student, waiting for placements, final semester, that I will get onto a job. But God had other plans. So I come across this guy through a documentary in my final semester, and he changes my life. Any idea who he is? Any guesses? Who is this chap? Socrates, good guess. Any more guesses? Aristotle, very good guess. You'll have free chai at Mitti Cafe for guessing. Julius, see, so many guesses now. You'll get chai anyway, for the enthusiasm. This chap's name is Nero. Nero was an emperor in the ancient Roman Empire, mighty rich. You see, he would win one war after the other, and one day he wins the biggest battle of his life. And when you win, what do? Party. So he decided to throw a party, and he invited the who's who of Tinseltown. He invited kings and queens, princes and princesses from across 7 kingdoms. And as evening befell, Nero said, "Boss, we need some lights to make the party happening and rocking." So he decided to burn waste to generate light. He decided to burn the prisoners of war and the poor people who were captured, who he considered not more than waste. I was 22 years old, sitting in that classroom while my friends walked out. I was there for the next 3 hours contemplating as to what just happened, what did I just see. Which is when I realized this simple thing, that the problem is not Nero. You know, you could equate Nero with atrocities, injustice, discrimination, all the not so nice things that happen in this world that will always happen. You know what the problem was? The problem was Nero's guests, as to how thousands of them could sing, dance, drink, when fellow human beings suffered, burned, and died. And that 22-year-old realized that she was one of Nero's guests. That is, if you feel something about anything, if there's something out here, and if you're not willing to take action, then you've taken a side. And unfortunately, that side is that of the oppressor. Having been brought up by this stellar lady, my grandmother, who had a disability, all that I could see in her while growing up was abilities. Contrary to the way when I looked at the world and the way I viewed how the world looks at people with disabilities, I was very confused. I decided I will not sit for college placements, I can't. And I started volunteering with organizations that work in the disability inclusion space, which is when I realized, so I'm a mother to a 1-year-old baby. So generally when we conceive, what do we say? We want a healthy baby. What does a healthy baby mean? A baby without a disability. The problem is not that there are 70 million people with disabilities in India and over 1 billion people with disabilities across the world. That statistics is not the problem. You know what the problem is? Yes. It is the disability in our perceptions that stops us from seeing the magic in their abilities, which is something that I wanted to change. I needed a common denominator that could connect people to people, and what better than, are you all hungry? Food. So food as a medium to do 2 simple things. One is money should enter the accounts of our team members year on year. But more important than that, 100 Mitti Cafes, 1,000 people, directly employed, 10,000 trained. We're talking about 70 million, 7 crore people with disabilities only in India. So second, the most important objective was to create awareness about inclusion with every meal or beverage that we serve. You see this girl, and you see this girl. So when I started Mitti, I started it with 0 startup capital and multiple rejections. I did not even know what CapEx and OpEx means. So when you don't have anything, then you have no fear to lose. So scarcity leads to desperation, leads to a leech-like attitude, leads to shamelessness. All great assets for any entrepreneur. So I went from door to door, house to house, shop to shop, asking the community, all of y'all, to join the movement of inclusion. So right from the second-hand spoon, second-hand oven, tissue paper, spoon were all donated by people I didn't know, by the community. This girl that you see in front of you, I remember the first day this girl came in for the interview. She came in crawling because at that point of time, her family could not afford a wheelchair. You would give her this clicker, you would give her a coffee. Her hands would shake and it would fall. Today, the same girl sitting on her wheelchair, she manages 10 other people with disability. She is the manager for our first cafe, and her name is Kirti. As I talk to you, we have hundreds of Kirtis across the 44 Mitti cafes that we have pan-India, managed by adults with physical, intellectual, and psychiatric disabilities. Together, they've served over 11 million meals and beverages. And what are these 11 million meals and beverages? What are these 11 million bills that we've generated? 11 million opportunities for these amazing people to create awareness about inclusion. We've additionally been able to skill over 5,000 people with disabilities across the country. So we all know this person in the center. Who is he? Narayan Murthy, founder of Infosys. The hero of the picture is someone else. Who was the hero of the picture? Center? So are you all correct answers? Yes, it is this boy here. His name is Bhairappa. He's about 3 feet in height, dwarfism, motor disability, mild intellectual disability. And the reason I call him the hero of the picture is that he is representative of the hundreds and millions of stories of people with disabilities that are often untold. When Bhairappa came in, he was rejected at 80 plus jobs, which is supposed that we got lucky. Coincidentally, the day Mr. Murthy came in was the day he came in for the interview with a toned t-shirt and barefoot. Today, the same boy, if you go to the Bangalore International Airport, and if you look at this graph and what is written in green, he's the team lead. He's leading our entire team at the Bangalore International Airport. You know, not just that, when persons with disabilities come in now, for the world, for you all to see their abilities, it'll happen. It'll happen at a later stage. For us, the larger challenge is to show them the mirror to their abilities after years of bullying, after years of rejection, after years of being told they're not good enough. This chap was told that it is because of his disability that his mother passed away. He's a child of ill omen. This child was told he will never find a job. Now he has overcome all of that, very good. He was told something even more painful. He was told because of his disability, nobody will ever love him. Love, such a basic need. But don't be too sad. Then this happened. Then he met Rupa at our cafe at Wipro. So that time, Bhairappa was working at Mitti Cafe Infosys. So this was an Infosys Wipro love story. For those of you all who don't know, Infosys and Wipro are... and just some years back, they got married as well. So we have 27 love stories at Mitti Cafe and counting. So this is an important picture. COVID happened, all our cafes shut down. And while we were looking at survival, one of our employees, Hemant, he's got cerebral palsy and autism. Generally, when we talk about people with intellectual disabilities, what do we say? They are aimless, they are crazy, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they are saying. Not all disabilities are visible, right? Hemant, he comes to us and he says, Didi, and I'll translate it for y'all. Didi, log bhook hai. Didi, there are people who are hungry, sister. And we know how to cook. Imagine this boy's vision, this boy with intellectual disability. He comes and says, if we start cooking, we talk about impact in numbers, right? Health in numbers, livelihood in numbers. We'll feed so many people, maybe 1 million people, and wow. This boy with intellectual disability, he comes and says, If we start cooking, nobody will stay hungry. This was his vision. We started with a few hundred meals, and today our team members with disabilities have cooked and served over 6 million meals to the economically vulnerable, thereby changing the paradigm that persons with disabilities given the right support can not just support themselves, but support the nation in need. And persons with intellectual disabilities, they may be slow, but then they are perfectionists at what they do. And you know where their strength is? In their heart. They think from their heart. And what a strength to have. We have our cafes at different places that you can spot us. We are at the Bangalore International Airport. This is a very important picture, and a picture very close to my heart. This we started at the Mumbai International Airport, and every one of the team members that you see here, when we were looking at the picture, this was by coincidence, but for all of them, it's their first livelihood opportunity. For all of them here, whether it's Caroline with cerebral palsy, she's been a disability rights activist for 15 years, yet her first job. Tyrus, his first job. And all of them are such stellars, such dynamites. You know, just imagining that people are losing out on such talent, and possibly a billion of them. So we are, of course, within the Mumbai International Airport. We are within the India Coffee House. We had the Federal Chancellor of Germany coming in. And then this happened. Where is this? Hansraj? Array, team, y'all are on my side. Suspense create karna tha. So this is the Supreme Court of India. So Mitti Cafe started its cafe inside the Supreme Court of India. We had the Chief Justice of India inaugurating it, thereby sending a message to the entire country about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We had another guest. We had the President coming in. We had another guest. We had the Defense Minister of our country inaugurating one of our cafes. Oh, this, by the way, this is an important picture, because this is the first time in any presentation I'm showing this picture. We're starting Mitti Cafe inside the Rashtrapati Bhavan. And this is a snippet of it. We've not yet inaugurated, but since this is a special event, here you see a glimpse. I think, you know, when I had just graduated out of college, and this is something that a lot of women entrepreneurs face. How many mothers in this room? Wow. Statistics tell us that once you become a mother, you'd ideally never be seen in the workforce. When I started my journey as an entrepreneur, I was asked by a lot of investors and donors that now you're just out of college and jumping and all energy. What is going to happen when you get married? And what is going to happen when, kaboom, you have a child? I didn't have an answer then, and I didn't get those checks. But I have an answer now. Since Orhan has been born, and I can write it down, and I think all the mothers present here would agree with me, being a mother makes you so much stronger, even as an entrepreneur. And there is nothing that can stop you. When Orhan was in my stomach, I traveled to 9 countries across 3 continents. After he's born, this is, I think today's flight must have been his 132nd flight. And all of this is because an organization like Japaigo said, hey, you're bringing along your child, that's great. It is because my husband out there said that you definitely should go for it. It is because I have colleagues in the organization who have my back. I have Pooja, I don't know where she is. I think she is with my baby while I'm here in front of you. It is the ecosystem and all genders that need to come around to make this a possibility. And lastly, there was a high tide, and there were millions of starfishes on the seashore dying. So when I started my journey, I would often think that, when we talk about hunger, when we talk about health issues, when we talk about livelihood, when we talk about discrimination, violence, we talk about it in millions and billions. What difference will it ever make if I do anything? Very valid question. And then I came across this simple story that changed my perception about change, and I hope it changes yours too. So as I mentioned, there was a high tide full of millions of starfishes that were dying, and there was this young girl picking up one starfish, throwing it into the water, the other starfish throwing it into the water. And a wise man, in inverted commas, comes and asks her, "Young girl, what are you doing?" She continues to do what she's doing. This time, he asks her more assertively, "Young girl, what are you doing? What difference does it make? The shore is full of millions of starfishes, and here you are, picking up one, throwing it into the water, the other throwing it into the water. What difference does it make?" What she did has changed my perception about change, and I hope it changes yours too. She picks up this starfish, she throws it into the water, and she tells the wise man that it made a difference to that one. For me, my first starfish was Kirti. And every day it is the hunger, the pursuit, the thirst to reach out to the billionth Kirti across the world for whom economic independence, dignity, healthcare, accessibility is not a reality. And generally we say social work, na? And we feel so good, oh, we're going to do social work. Let's replace social work with social duty. To pay off that udhar, that debt that we have for everything God has done for us, the community has done for us, our family has done for us. It is a debt. There are millions of young girl children who would never see daylight because of their gender. There are millions of young girls who would never go to school because of their gender. There are millions out there who are homeless, hungry, waiting for someone to just fill their appetite by just coming and talking to them. And here we are at a point of privilege in this amazing room. It is a debt that we have to pay off to the community. And as one of my favorite poets says, and I will also translate it, he says, "मेरे सीने में नहीं तो तेरे सीने में सही, हो कहीं भी आग लेकिन आग जलनी चाहिए. We'll all die someday." And irrespective of whether we live or die, that ignition needs to continue in someone's heart. Do that one bit, inspire just that one more person. And the world will change for what it deserves to be. And I'll end by saying, I promise, the magic is in each one of you all to really make that difference. Believe in that power, believe in the magic that is in you. Compassion and courage are two weapons that can eradicate any problem that our world faces today. And that you all have naturally. I believe in your magic. Thank you so much for having me here. With that, I'd want to call these amazing rock stars who are from our team. जल्दी से इंट्रोड्यूस कर दो.
मैं निम्मी हूँ और कैशियर के काम करती हूँ.
So Nimmi is going to be working at the Rashtrapati Bhavan.
I'm Prashant, assist for chef.
So he's the assistant chef.
I'm Shaheen and I am customer serving.
आप बताओ. आप कौन है?
I am Abhiraj Kumar. I am serving.
Very good. Thank you so much for having all of us here. And I also have my friend Yashodhara and her son. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Japaigo, for doing everything amazing that you all do. And towards a world where we reach out to the billionth Kirti for whom economic independence, healthcare, equity is not yet a reality. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alina. We move on to the next speaker of the evening, which is Aradhana Rai Gupta. Aradhana is the co-founder of Project Bala. Project Bala is an innovative menstrual health solutions provider working to end period poverty and period illiteracy while generating employment. Aradhana is an MBA graduate from Cornell University with a bachelor's in economics from St. Stephen's College, Delhi. She worked with multiple multinationals in their marketing and risk advisory departments early on in her career. Her passion for community work and that led her to co-found Project Bala, where she has realized that even small organizations at the grassroots level can trigger impactful change at scale. Her work on sustainability leadership at the University of Cambridge, where she helped large organizations and corporations make sustainable change in the development sector, brings valuable expertise to Project Bala. I present you Ms. Aradhana Rai Gupta.
Hi Hi everyone, and a warm namaskar to all those present. How do you even follow up with what we just experienced? I actually had to hold myself for a minute before getting on stage. I had tears in my eyes when I saw everyone, and especially Alina's talk is always so powerful. I've heard her a couple of times before, and she never fails to bring a tear to your eyes. Incredible work, Alina, Neha. I'm so glad to be following you guys because what I'm going to talk about has a huge intersection with menstrual health, be it mental health, where we think that importance of menstrual health forms the foundation of a girl's self-confidence for the rest of her life, or our work with intersectionality when it comes to people with disabilities, how do they manage their periods going forward. I want to start our conversation with helping you visualize two scenarios. Scenario one, imagine you're talking to a village woman named Sita Ji. You're asking her about her children, their education, the recipes that she makes at her home in Alwar. And she's happily sharing these little details of her life with you, rather oversharing all of this with you. And suddenly you say the word period in front of her. What do you think her reaction is going to be? I'll tell you what Sita Ji's reaction was when I said Mahavari or periods in front of her. She quickly hid her entire face with her chunni. Scenario two, you see a woman riding her bike on the roads of Rajasthan with her hair flying all over. She's educated 3,000 women and girls on the topic of menstrual health, and she's sold enough period products to be able to afford that same scooter. The surprise, these two women are the same, just 1 year apart. We started Project Bala in 2018 to bring hope to thousands of women and girls, just like Sita Ji, by ending period poverty and period illiteracy. But before delving more into what it is that we do, I want to talk about a framework that has kept me motivated for the last 6 years since our inception. And that is Simon Sinek's golden rule for organizations. More often than not, organizations end up talking about what they do and how they do it. For example, what I just did 30 seconds back. Project Bala is a menstrual health provider working on ending period poverty and period illiteracy through innovative and sustainable menstrual health solutions. But why is it that I do this? Why do I wake up every day to work towards solving a mammoth problem? And I'm so glad to be sharing the stage today with people like Neha and Alina, who've clearly found their why during doing the work that they do. I was volunteering in Rajasthan right after college, right after I came back from my MBA, because that's what you do when you don't have a job and you're interviewing for consulting companies and investment banking companies. I went for 2 months to Rajasthan, again in the same district as Alwar, and I was teaching the young girls and young boys English and maths, basic English and maths. And I realized I would find myself waiting for 8 hours after 8 a.m. to go back to the facility that I was staying at to use a washroom. And this was happening because there was no running water in the schools that I was working at. This made me question, if I am facing this problem for 2 months, what about the girls that I'm teaching? What about the boys that I'm teaching? They come into school day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Do they also have to wait 8 to 9 hours to use a proper washroom? Upon secondary research, I found that 40,000 women and girls lose their lives every year to poor menstrual health practices. 25% of young going girls to schools end up missing 3 to 4 days of school every month because they don't have adequate facilities in the schools to take care of their periods. I don't even want to get into the environmental repercussions because those are a ticking time bomb. Every woman and girl, we end up using 2 trucks worth of disposable sanitary napkins in our lifetime. If we are 50 women here, that's 100 trucks of non-biodegradable disposable sanitary napkins. That means it will not be within the grounds for the next 500 years. It often goes unnoticed, but it is a ticking time bomb that no one is talking about. And with this experience, I found the answer to my most important why. If I don't take action now, who will? So my co-founder and I, we came up with a three-pronged solution that works on the principle of awareness, accessibility, and affordability to tackle those same problems that we ourselves faced in the government schools of Rajasthan. Our first solution revolves around awareness. We built a module in conversation, and I'm not exaggerating, with over 25,000 women and girls from across the country. This module talks about 7 different topics, right from what are periods to how to manage period pain without there being any additional expense to your family, when to visit a doctor, etc. And these are infused with storytelling, fun, interactive elements for higher retention. We've also ensured spaces for intergenerational interaction, as well as involving men and boys into the conversation, so that when a young girl goes back and says, "Mummy, मैं kitchen जा सकती हूँ period के time को," there won't be a problem. There shouldn't be a problem that she faces at home. She should be allowed to go to the kitchen. But the family needs to understand what is the reason behind that myth and taboo that has been forced down generation from generation. Our second is an eco-friendly product that we've built thanks to the textile experts that we have on our team, as well as a lot of cycles of feedback that we've gotten from the community. This one kit of Bala solves 2 years' worth problems of inaffordability and unaccessibility. So that means if someone is using a Bala kit for 2 years, they don't have to physically go to a shop to buy any other sort of sanitary napkins. In addition to this, we've also built the world's first reusable pad that works on the principle of containing blood, not absorbing it. This pad uses 1/10 amount of water that will be required to wash any reusable pad in the market, as well as wash any sort of ghar ka kapda that currently 70% of women end up using in India. It is completely leak-proof, and hopefully we'll be launching this in the next 2 months in India. And our last is our livelihood model. We initiated this 2 years back because of the demand that had been created because of the awareness and product that we had distributed. What we do when we go into community to do our implementation, we appoint 2 to 3 women for every 100 women that we've impacted. And these women become the spokespeople as well as the salespeople of our products. Not only is our solution sustainable in that community, but also women end up earning a livelihood on each kit that they sell. This image is from Nepal, and this woman, I'm not exaggerating, walks around 18 to 20 kilometers every day to sell these Bala kits to everyone. So far, we have worked with over 8 lakh beneficiaries in 4 countries. We've also prevented 15 crores, 36 lakh pads that could have gone into the landfill, polluted the landmines, polluted our water bodies. And we worked with over 300 partners like Jopaigo, like Wilgrow, to be able to bring our solution to the last mile customers. I think this is not our biggest impact, but something that we're truly, truly proud of. We do an impact evaluation with every intervention that we do, and we found that there is a 98% increase in confidence levels. That means when a girl goes to the school, she doesn't feel ashamed to be using pads. She doesn't feel ashamed to be telling her teacher she's on her period. She doesn't feel ashamed to be taking a 1 day off कि मैम मेरे को घर जाना है, मेरा थोड़ा पेट दर्द कर रहा है आज. We've also seen a 77% acceptability rate of our pads. That means women have not only used these pads for 2 years, but they've also asked to purchase these after their 2-year cycle has ended. Some of the national and international recognitions, but our most important and most valuable impact that we've seen is in the behavior shift that we've seen in the women and girls that we worked with. Sita ji was the first working woman of her family. That's her son, that's her husband right there. She had to fight tooth and nail to be able to get this job with us. She was able to sell enough period products to buy that same scooter that you see in that image. And that is when we found our why. We found that it is so important to dig deep into yourselves to understand why it is that you're doing what you're doing and create millions of Sita Jis in the country.